This is probably the first roll of film this camera's shot in more than a decade, and we're going to find out what it looks like. This is an OM10. It was built in 1979, and it was my dad's before he lent it to me. He bought it roughly when he was around about in his 20s, around the same age I am. And I've always seen him have it in his drawer and things, but I haven't ever seen it used. So when he gave me the chance to give it a go, I thought it'd be best to see what the photos look like, and even if it still works, there's no guarantee. I haven't developed this film yet. I'm gonna go do that later, and we'll see that at the end of the video. But there's a chance every single image on this roll of the film is not exposed or entirely overexposed. So we have no idea of knowing what the quality of the photo is going to be, or even if there are any photos. The OM10 was a middle range camera. It came after the other OM series which Olympus did, which were much higher professional cameras. Although I must say it's pretty decent. It's also got this adapter on the front, which means you have total manual control over the exposure, whereas without this little thing on the front, see if I can pop it off. There we go. Without this plugged on the front, you're restricted to aperture priority, if you're familiar with that. So plugging this on the front means that you control both the aperture and the shutter speed, so you have total control. The OM10 does take a couple of batteries, but that's purely for the auto exposure to calculate how long the shutter speed should be if you're not using it in manual. Couple of nice little tags on here for a nice old school strap. Tiny little thing on the top here lets you just check whether or not the batteries are working, and you should be able to hear that. It's just a normal manual roller film, although I think they did make a device which rolled the film on for you, so you could do the equivalent of like fast multiple exposures if you were a sports photographer or something. Like I said, you just roll the film onwards as per usual using this, and then once you have your settings, or manual focus of course. Actually, autofocus hadn't really been brought out yet. I mean, the next series after this, like the 202 and the 101, did have autofocus. So this is pretty much one of the last consumer cameras that were made without an autofocus. And that's the sound you get. Very satisfying, actually. Popping open the back, if I just turn it off. Popping open the back's quite easy. You just have to release this little reverse switch, which lets you roll the film back. And then you actually lift up the roller, this little lever, and pop the back off. You can see where the film goes in there. One thing I am concerned, if anything's going to spoil these photos, I mean, it sounds like it's operating fine, so I'm not really worried about the auto exposure being broken, but it's still a possibility. There's a very fine rubber seal, kind of a double-edged lip around here, because if any light gets in here, the film's absolutely screwed, because after you've used it, it just wraps around this barrel, and if any light gets in there, it just wrecks it. And it's a bit perish, this rubber in here. So I'm not that worried because it's still like a double-edged seal, but if anything's going to ruin us, it's going to be that. Learning to use this has actually been a joy. I, like a lot of people, am obsessed with checking the photo as soon as I take it, and if it's not perfect, I'll take it again and again and again. And it's easy to take 100, even 1,000 photos if you wanted to do in a couple of days. And almost none of which I'll be interested in. I'll just want the perfect photo. And that takes up a huge amount of time. I have to look through all the photos, and it gets boring, and that crushes all of the joy out of why I like photography and why I like to do it. So why bother? So I'm hoping that learning to use this and frankly restricting myself, I mean, I'm filming myself on a camera which frankly outperforms this camera by 30 years, so why wouldn't I use that? Because hopefully I'm going to get over my obsession with checking the photos, my obsession with making sure they're perfect, and not letting me drag me down. So once I get over that, hopefully I can move back to using whatever camera I like and just enjoy the photos for what they are, and not get wrapped up in being a perfectionist, which I'm guilty of in pretty much all of my pursuits, and it has a habit of ruining things. The film isn't anything special. I mean, like I said, I don't even know if the camera works. It's just Fujicolor Superior's 400 ISO, pretty general purpose stuff. and it's just to see whether or not the camera works. If all goes to plan, I'll be moving on to this much nicer film. It's 36 exposures. You normally get a few more exposures for black and white film because it's generally a bit cheaper to manufacture. This stuff's 24. Don't ask me why, they're the numbers, they normally come in 12s. This stuff you can get developed in about an hour, while you wait at whatever your favourite establishment is. I normally go to Boots because the people behind the counter generally know what they're doing. This stuff takes a couple of weeks to develop. It gets sent off to a lab rather than being done in-house in kind of whatever high street place. I'm not a serious film photographer. Other serious film photographers will tell me that unless you send your film to a lab, then it's not worth developing at all. Maybe that's true, but I don't really care. Of course, not to mention the fact that this camera is cool as hell. Walking around town with this around your neck, shooting a couple of pictures. People tend to respond to it better as well. People tend to be awkward in front of a camera, but for some reason I think when they see it being a bit old school and analog, they kind of relax a little bit more. And actually I think it's easier to get more natural, candid looking photos with an analog camera. I mean, obviously you're limited in your ability to take the photos in some extent. But people tend to behave better. All right, it's time to go take this film to get developed. That didn't go so well, did it? It turns out Boots and every other photo studio in the town that I live in is closed down. Boots got rid of their equipment 2 weeks ago, so we're just late. I've checked, there's nowhere else to do it apart from Asda, which I do want to avoid. It's not got the best reputation. Not that Boots is like a premier photo studio anyway, but it's not a supermarket either. So we're going to have to go to Asda to find out how this ends, but there's too far to go today. We'll have to go tomorrow.